Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Nerd to the Third Power, your one-stop shop for all things nerdy and awesome. I'm your host and master of ceremonies, Dr. Gonzo. With me, as always, in this epic quest of awesomeness is our resident anime gods, the Cat. Cat, you are looking hale and hearty this week.
I don't know what that's in reference to. I'm very tired, and my cat has been screaming at me for the last 5 minutes.
It's not really, it wasn't really a reference to anything. You're just saying you look a little more energetic this week, but apparently that is a vicious lie.
No, well, I mean, by comparison to previous weeks, I'm sure it's better, but I'm very, very tired. We record on Tuesdays, and this has already been the longest week of my life.
Okay. Anything you care to share, or is it stuff that's kind of you're under an NDA for?
No, I'm getting ready to move in a few weeks, like a month. Yeah, like a month from now, and trying to pack the contents of my life into boxes while also like stressing out at work and stuff. I'm tired, and my cat doesn't let me sleep past the hour 3:30 a.m. Because he's a terrorist, and yeah, I'm tired all the time.
Well, you have my heartfelt sympathies for the move. We actually, by sheer dint of coincidence, I think I mentioned this before, but my brother was supposed to be moving in with me, and we just got him moved in this whole last weekend. The poor kid's been working with a buddy of his to get all of his stuff moved in. But before that, we had to get a bunch of my extra crap out of the apartment to make room for his stuff, and that was just a hellacious journey that involved transporting 3 mattresses and a box spring across Baltimore County, which I'm sure will be could make a fine comedy film directed by John Hughes. But yeah, so my heartfelt sympathies to you and your bank account for the journey that you're about to undertake.
I'm actually doing okay because I'm just moving down the road. I have a friend who has a big house, and he's gonna let me and my current roommate come move in with him, and live at a significantly reduced rate compared to rent in a shitty apartment. And we've been talking about this for months now, so we've actually been slowly packing boxes and taking them over there and packing more boxes, so that hopefully by the time the moving day comes around, we'll only need to take the big furniture.
Okay, alrighty.
Anyway, so that's the thrilling tale. By the way, there is a gentleman at my work who started listening to this podcast and was very concerned about you having a home. He kept saying, "Why did you let him get evicted, Kat?" And I'm like, I didn't have any control over it.
I mean, has he looked at a map recently?
I had to tell him we live on different ends of the country. But if he listens to this, he knows who he is.
Well, I appreciate the concern, and good sir, I am well housed now, thank you. But yeah, no. So yeah, we put that seems to be a running theme with us this year, is that neither of us can really seem to put down roots anywhere before we have to just uproot our lives. Oh boy. But anyway, we are getting sidetracked. We have a really fun show for you guys tonight. This week we're discussing Cat's favorite movie, my favorite movie trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings film trilogy. I am now going to take a moment to pause so that you may now crumble into dust, because holy shit, we are so old!
Oh my god! Back in the day when Lord of the Rings was first released.
Oh my god, guys.
Oh. Gonzo remembers the first press release, the first casting announcement. He was there when the actors were named. Only the book nerds are going to get that joke. I miss you, Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadil. Anyway.
But yes, so that's going to be a really fun discussion. We're going to take a look back on the trilogy's impact on popular culture. And as we are old enough to remember a time before the Lord of the Rings trilogy being filmed, we're also going to talk a bit about the weird, strange journey that it took to get to where it is. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But of course, there's procedure to follow, so we're going to begin, as always, with Ask a Geek. And we got some questions here. Let's see here now. First question here comes from Henri. Very that's a new name. And their question is, are we excited about the Kevin Smith produced He-Man and the Masters of the Universe series? So Kat, as you're a big She-Ra fan, let's start with you on this one.
I would be, this is just genuine because I don't know what the story is going to be like, but I would have been way more excited about a He-Man series that connected to the new She-Ra series. As it stands, like, these two series are not going to be connected at all. So I'm not really as pumped as I would like to be, because they're not going to be the same thing. As I understand it, the new He-Man, the Kevin Smith He-Man, is going to be a continuation of the old He-Man. So it's just going to be, I assume, a cooler version of what we watched as kids. But I'm not really excited. I was never into He-Man as much as I was She-Ra. But also, like, I've seen the character designs, and He-Man's head is so small compared to his body. And I'm not... Guys, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that he has been bewitched or something to have a tiny, tiny head. His head is so small. Like, it's smaller than just one of his biceps. And stylistically, I cannot wrap my head around this series. Now, what I do like is that the ladies are buff. I like a buff lady in a series. But He-Man, to me, just looks so ridiculous. I think that, his costume being very much the same as it was from back in the day, like that, like a loincloth kind of deal, just looks so dated. And I get it's a continuation, and it's banking on everybody having a lot of nostalgia. And I don't know, I was expecting something a little bit more, I don't know, different. Even though we've been promised is the same. So I guess, I just never really cared for the He-Man series as much as She-Ra as a kid. And the new She-Ra has obviously blown me out of the water. So I don't know that He-Man could even come close to having that same kind of impact, because they're not really. I don't know that it's gonna, it's not serving the same purpose, I guess. She-Ra is bringing an old franchise to a new audience with a lot of concepts that are up to date with modern times. And when we say that He-Man is just going to be a continuation of the 80s series, that kind of tells me that they're not really out, to do that same kind of thing. They're here to bring the old show to a new, younger audience, but they're not really there to modernize or update or do any of that kind of thing. It's like a whole different purpose that it doesn't excite me. That's not to say it won't be good or that all the designs are bad. I just think He-Man looks ridiculous, and that unless they're gonna do something really cool with the story, I don't know how they're going to make it more interesting by today's standards. There we go.
Okay. For me, well, as I've said many times, He-Man was never really on my radar as a kid. I think people don't realize I'm actually younger than they think I am. Like, I didn't grow up in the 80s. I'm very much a 90s kid. So by the time I was old enough to, watch cartoons and really appreciate them, He-Man was already off the air. I've got vague memories of the New Adventures, the one where he went into space. But that's it. Yeah. So He-Man was never really on my radar. I didn't even realize that the early 2000s reboot even existed until just a couple years ago, when I just happened to watch the Toys That Made Us episode on He-Man, followed in short order by the Power of Grayskull documentary that was on Netflix. Which, side note, did you ever actually watch that, Kat?
No, I think I just watched the Toys That Made Us about He-Man.
Oh, okay. Alrighty. So, He-Man was, when She-Ra was announced, I was just kind of like, oh, well, it's a thing. It's there. People like it. Good for them. Can't really say the same about the new He-Man, and that's because the association with Kevin Smith, and that's because I actively dislike Kevin Smith.
Aww.
So my meh reaction to She-Ra has become an ew reaction for He-Man, because I do not like Kevin Smith. I think he's just really overrated. I do not understand why he is regarded as God's gift to geekdom. So,
I mean, he's no Will Wheaton in terms of being God's gift to geekdom, but
not a big fan of his either. But that's getting off topic.
I like Kevin Smith just fine, but I only really know his films and not much else. So I don't really have anything like, oh, it's Kevin Smith, it's going to be so good, or oh, it's Kevin Smith, it's going to be so bad. It's really just like the freshness of the content is what I'm looking for, because, okay, it's this big thing where when we were kids, cartoons all had to have a message. Everybody had to learn something by the end of the day. And we were watching a lot of cartoons with recycled animation that had no real story. They were just there to sell toys. And nowadays, there are cartoons that can sell toys and do sell toys, but actually have like... Oh my god, my cat is screaming at me. I don't know if you can hear him. Anyway, but we can actually have meaningful character development and more than one-dimensional characters and in-depth stories and huge story arcs. And that's just... We didn't really have that very much as kids with our cartoons. My cat is just yelling. I'm really hoping the mic isn't picking up on him, because he literally keeps walking into my bathroom so that it echoes more.
It is picking up, but so far we've been lucky he hasn't screeched while you've been talking, so it's not something I can't work around in post.
Kevin.
I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to be bad, or that I don't wish people I don't wish the people enjoyment, but it's just not going to be something that is going to be very high on my priority list.
Yeah, and honestly, like, we've just now seen some stills. We haven't seen like a trailer or anything, and I feel like I'm not gonna want to judge it too hard until we see a trailer. Or is there a trailer? I only remember seeing stills.
If there's a trailer, I don't know about it. So
okay, good. I'm not stupid. Okay, so
no comment.
good, smart, good call. So maybe once there's a trailer out and we can kind of gauge what kind of story there's going to be, because I don't want a show that's banking on the same things that the original series did. Because, I mean, let's be real. A lot of the stuff in the original series was kind of dumb, because they were really stretched for ideas on how to sell toys. And they just kept coming up with more and more ridiculous things and silly named things in order to sell more toys. I mean, this is just... They said it. Like, there's literally documentaries about how this worked. And that's why I thought She-Ra was so impressive, because it really didn't worry about that sort of thing, and it was really just about the story and the characters. And that's the kind of thing I like out of a show, even if that show is a cartoon.
Well, I mean, like you said, we've only seen stills, so I mean, maybe something down the line will come and change my mind. But like I said, for me, it's going to be an uphill battle for it. So. All right, next question here comes from Ray, and his question is, with Castlevania Season 4 bringing the series to a close, what do we think of the rumors of a spin-off series, and what would we like to see done in such a series? So, there's what I'd really like to see, and there's what I think is possible. And unfortunately, what I'd really like to see, I don't think is going to be possible for reasons that I really can't go into without spoiling it. So wait until we actually do a full review of the series as a whole before we go into that. But I really wanted from the beginning to see a kind of multi-generational story, because that's what the original Castlevania series is. Each game is a different member of the Belmont clan going up against Dracula and or his minions. So I was really hoping to see like a multi-generational story with really epic long plot threads weaving through these, and it would have been perfect to do that, especially starting with Castlevania 3, because of the character of Alucard, who has fought beside multiple generations of the Belmont clan. But like I said, given how they ended Season 4, I don't think that's going to be possible. I don't know. We'll see. There's rumor that there is going to be a Devil May Cry animated series that is going to be set in the same universe as Castlevania, which confuses the hell out of me because Castlevania is Konami and Devil May Cry is, I think, Capcom. I'm gonna go look that up. I'm pretty sure that's two different game companies. So I'm kind of raising my eyebrows at the legality of such a prospect. So yeah, but so I don't know, maybe I'll get my multi-generational epic, maybe not, but we'll see. But I will say, as far as season 4 goes, I was pretty satisfied with how it ended. So I enjoyed it. So Kat, what about you? What would you like to see done in a potential Castlevania spinoff?
So I have not watched seasons 3 or 4 yet. I'm trying to do it in the next week or so that we can podcast about it and have me know what's going on. So I also have never played any of the games, obviously, so I have really no information to go on. I really like your idea of being multi-generational. I think that would be really, really cool.
I mean, JoJo's Bizarre Adventures made it work for about 30 years?
Yes, forever. Through many, many art styles. Getting increasingly flamboyant. Oh my god, can we do that for Castlevania? That would be so good. Just the hair and the costumes get more ridiculous. Okay, so if I could have anything as a spin-off, regardless of canon or what, I would want, even though it hasn't been relevant for several seasons, because, Dracula's the big bad of season 1, I want a slice of life series of Dracula and his wife just living their days, just going about their normal stuff and having like normal husband-wife interactions, little fights about dumb shit like loading the dishwasher. Not that there's dishwashers, but I just think I don't even like slice of life, but I would watch the shit out of a slice of life about him and his wife. Just,
honey, what did we talk about? Opening portals to the underworld in the living room.
Exactly.
Close me when I'm done.
I want a comedy of that so badly. Like, did you string up another door-to-door salesman in the basement hanging by his ankles? Because we've talked about this. It would be so good.
What's funny is there's actually a sort of a pseudo spin-off to the games that would work with, and that's Kid Dracula, which was sort of a chibi cartoon spoof of the Castlevania games produced by Konami, and it's about this little cartoony version of Alucard. So I think taking your idea and making a Kid Dracula series out of it, I think would actually be really interesting and funny to see.
It would be cute. I think it would be real cute. Just any little slice of life would be awfully cute.
Okay. Alrighty, and let's see here now. Next question here. Here's one that is actually related to our discussion topic, and that is from Tyler, and his question is directed to you, Kat, and it is, what do you think of the in development Amazon Lord of the Rings television series, and do you think it will replace the films in the public consciousness?
No, I don't think it will replace the films in the public's consciousness, because we are not going to stop comparing the two. We'll get into our feelings about Lord of the Rings, because that is actually our topic for the day. I am very excited to see the upcoming series, mostly because they are going to pour an absolute ton of money into it. And this is not something where you could do it on the cheap and have it be any good at all. Now, I have things I'm concerned about, but I'm sort of not keeping myself super informed about it, because they've been in talks about this for years, and then there's always rumors about, it's going to feature this character, it's going to feature that character, set in this time or that time, and I'm at the point where I'm so lost as to what time period it's actually going to be about, and whether or not they've actually cast anybody yet, and I just want them to do a good job. That's all I really care about, because the stuff that they're going to be tapping into is not going to be it's not going to be lifted as directly from Lord of the Rings. They're really going to have to be tapping into the like the untold stories or the Silmarillion, and that's where stuff gets really, really complicated. And to turn stuff that politically complicated into something as entertaining as Lord of the Rings was, in terms of like, oh, it's action and it's a big popcorn film, and we're going to sit there at the edge of our seats watching these grand battles and stuff while also philosophizing. I think that's going to be an interesting challenge for the showrunners, and I'm very, very excited to see what they do. I have high hopes. And I'm so afraid the hopes are going to get dashed.
Okay. And he's also got a question for me, and that question is, I remember you in the past, Gonzo, saying that you did not like limited run games. Have you changed your mind about them? Oh, shit. This is someone who follows me on Twitter, isn't it? And has seen me posting about my limited run purchases. Yes, I've changed my mind, but that's because they've changed how they've done their business. So my irritation with limited run came from the fact that at the time, all of their stuff was limited pre-order. They only made a certain quantity of stuff, and that was it. And if you didn't get in on those pre-orders within like the first 2 minutes, you just weren't going to get it. And you'd have to pay an obscene amount of money on the secondary market. Since then, they've actually switched to what they're calling open pre-orders, which is they'll say, okay, you've got 4 weeks from this date to this date to get your pre-order in. You can order multiple copies if you so choose, but as long as you get your pre-order in within this basically 30-day window, you're going to get your game. So it's made it a lot easier to get a release that you really want from them, because if you don't have the money on, say, the day that they open, it's like, okay, well, I can wait a couple of weeks until I get my next paycheck and set some money aside to save up for this. So yeah, I will say I've changed my mind on limited run games, because like I said, it's become a lot easier to actually get stuff that I actually want from them. And the one time that they actually went back to the limited quantity pre-orders, since then, that I'm aware of, there was actually a good reason for it. That was because it was for a PlayStation Vita game, and Sony is no longer manufacturing PlayStation Vita cartridges, so they were stuck with a limited stock to begin with. So, yeah, I'll say yes. I've changed my mind on limited run games, and I've actually gotten a lot of stuff that is really cool from them. So, and actually, it's kind of funny. We're speaking about Castlevania. They're putting out this big fuck off $180 Castlevania retro collection that is going to just break my wallet, but I have to have it so bad because it comes with a really awesome shadow box that I want to hang up on my wall. Oh, forget about your friend being concerned about me having home. He should be more concerned about me having enough money to feed myself, because I spend all of it on games.
He'll probably also blame me for you not being able to feed yourself.
Because you're the only one of us within reach.
Yes.
I just snorted
kind
like a pig there. Painful. All right, but that is all the Ask Geek questions that we have for this week. Thank you as always for sending them in. As always, you can send them to us through the email at drgonzo@nerdofthethirdpower.com. We love getting your questions, love reading them on the air, so go ahead and get your questions in, and you just might get yours read on the show. All right, and with that, we're going to jump right into our discussion topic. So, as we have said, well, I know Kat has said many times, I'm not sure if I ever mentioned it, but our two favorite movies are the Lord of the Rings trilogy, produced by Peter Jackson. First Fellowship of the Ring came out in 2001, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it was our generation's Star Wars. Like, it was the biggest thing to happen in film for our generation until the Marvel Cinematic Universe kicked off. This really was, the biggest thing that happened to us in film, and it left such a mark on popular culture that now, coming up on the 20th anniversary, we thought it'd be fun to just go back and talk about this trilogy, what it means to us, and how it's shaped popular culture since then. And so let's just start right into it. So let's go. Let's ask the first question. So, Kat, where were you when you first heard when you first heard about the Lord of the Rings films?
I don't remember. That was a long time ago. I don't remember hearing casting announcements or anything like that. I don't think I was really into paying attention to that sort of thing. But the Lord of the Rings were one of those things where I just remember sitting in the theater, and then the next weekend sitting in the theater, and then the next day sitting in the theater, and like my family and I would go see each of these movies like 4 times in theaters and sit there and sit through the whole credits and just I just loved these films. But yeah, I didn't really have like a where were you when they announced this stuff?
See, I remember exactly how I came to see the first film, and that was actually on a school field trip. So which is narrated because I went to a religious school that year, which you would think that Lord of the Rings would not be something they would be encouraging us to see, but no, they absolutely went ham on it. It's like, oh hey, Fellowship of the Ring is coming out, let's all get together as a school and watch the Rankin Bass Hobbit so that we know the story up to that point. This is a really small school, so I think there's only maybe like 200 students total. But like the whole school went on a field trip on release day to go see the Fellowship of the Ring, and the Lord of the Rings had always been my favorite book. From the time I was 8 years old, I'd read all 3 books, absolutely loved them. So they were my favorite books ever. So to see them on the big screen and actually done well was completely mind blowing to me. Because there had been films of books, of fantasy books prior to this, but they were always like cutting things out or changing details, rearranging the story to the phrase my dad used back in the day was, it was made for executives, not for fans. So to see my favorite book rendered on screen and made for the fans, I mean, it just totally blew me away. And I remember, I think I saw Fellowship of the Ring like 6 times. I dragged like every single member of my family to see it individually so that I could get more showings in. And it absolutely blew me away. And to go back and watch the making of documentaries and learn about just like the amount of work that they put into like the detail, the amount of effort they put into things that like you either wouldn't even see or wouldn't even consciously notice if you did see it. It was just it was a perfect storm of artistry, craftsmanship, and resources coming together. This whole thing. And the thing about this is, it was also one of those movies that I never thought was ever going to happen. Because I would hear about, I would read stories about like, oh, Lord of the Rings movie is in development like all through the 90s, like in magazines. It's like, oh, this studio has picked up Lord of the Rings, or that studio's picked up Lord of the Rings, or they've chosen a filming location, but nothing ever really concrete came out of it. So, I almost had to do a double take when the first trailer came out. I was like, wait, this is real? It's happening? So so that was how I first came to see the Lord of the Rings films, and like is it an I wish I could talk today.
Use your words.
Is it an exaggeration to say that it was for our generation what Star Wars was back in the 70s? Is it an exaggeration to say that?
No, I think they had different impacts on. In ways that we can talk about, but no, I think I'd say it was the equivalent of Star Wars in that many people still have not seen it, and it's still kind of nerdy, but I'll say that Star Wars had a much more lasting impact than Lord of the Rings did, and I would say that boils down to toys and marketing toys. But for us living in that time where it took a few years, but we got to go into these theaters and sit down and watch a trilogy of films and see how they changed cinema forever. I think that level of impact, that immediate level of impact, was the equivalent of Star Wars. And the way that we still revere Lord of the Rings as this penultimate trilogy, it's so iconic now, all these years later, in the same way that Star Wars is.
So what was your emotional journey when you saw these films? Like, what was the impact that they had on you?
Find that hard to describe, because I just love these films a lot. Obviously, there's having read the books and stuff, some stuff that's going to happen, but the emotional journey, it's exactly what you want it to be. I think the emotional journey is summed up perfectly in The Two Towers, when the White Wizard shows up and it's Gandalf and not Saruman. And no matter how many times I watch those films, that is one of my favorite reveals, even though it's going to happen, because of the build-up, the music, the way that they did the voices and everything. It's a film series that is so perfectly acted and scored and beautiful that it leads you down the journey that it wants you to take. And you go through these, panicked moments where there's fighting and the ring wraiths, and then just utter despair when Gandalf falls, and then hope when he comes back, and you feel so worried the first time you see King Theoden, and then he comes out of his thing, and then you're all like, okay, cool, this is really rad. And it leads you on so many different emotional journeys, and I'm really easy to hook for this sort of thing, so I'll follow whatever emotional journey the film wants me to go. When Boromir dies, every time I watch that movie, I'm just in tears, because every single time it's so sad.
And I think a lot of that comes down to just the absolute perfect storm of casting on this film. Like, we will never see a cast like this again. Where I'm convinced we'll never see a cast like this again, where just everyone was just perfectly cast and absolutely dedicated to their roles. And like, there is not a weak actor in the bunch. Absolutely everybody in this movie just completely sells their role and owns it, and it's just incredible. I mean, and like, it's almost like trying to describe the very concept of color here. It's like, it's something that is so iconic and so ingrained into our pop culture consciousness that we just have an innate understanding of it without having the need or even the ability to put into words just how perfect this cast was. Because if any one of these performers, if Elijah Wood had been swapped out for anybody else, if anybody besides Viggo Mortensen had played Aragorn, if anybody besides John Rhys Davies had played Gimli, this movie would not have worked.
Yeah, for sure. Especially given that Viggo was not even their first choice. They had already started filming, and then whoever it was they had originally cast ended up not working out, and they had to get Viggo on set like immediately. And it's like, what a perfect storm of actors to come in and play these roles, and how earnest Sean Astin is, and Elijah Wood's just giant soulful eyes, and the chemistry between Dominic Monaghan and Billy Boyd just being little trickster shits that they are. Everything works out so well. And even the villains are so well cast. And everybody is a very different character from everybody else, which is not something that the book does a really good job of getting across. And that's such a testament to the actors and them bringing in their own directions and their own experiences to the roles and really committing to putting out a great performance.
But, I mean, like, even there have been movies that have been on the level of anticipation and hype as Lord of the Rings. Like we just had Endgame come through, but like even with Endgame, when we did our review of that, it was like, okay, well, the cast was great except for maybe this one little bit over here that was kind of weak, or with Star Wars, we enjoyed this, but there was this little bit over here that's kind of weak. I don't think we could come up with a single really harsh deal breaker criticism about the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was just such a perfect storm.
I mean,
and the thing is, like, if you look at the really amazing thing about it is, like, if you look at Hollywood, at the Hollywood thought process, even back then, like, it's amazing that this film even got off the ground.
That's true.
I mean, I remember going back and watching the making of documentaries where they were talking about just shopping this around, and they wound up they took it to He Who Will Not Be Named, and the guy heard their pitch, and they were just pitching as a 2-film duology, and again, guy I won't name says, well, why would anybody make this 2 movies? This is a 3-film project. Like, just that one decision, like, how much of a difference would that have made to the final product if the Lord of the Rings had been released as a duology instead of a trilogy? Like, the fact that this executive put that much stock into this idea to actually have it be a trilogy and have the story be told at its own pace. I mean, I'm amazed at it happening back then, and if we heard about it happening now, it'd be like, is this person all right? Are they okay? Are they sick? Do we need to get them help? What's going on here?
Yeah, because in reality, like, fantasy, high fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, it's still kind of niche. It doesn't have the same mass appeal as other genres. You can put out James Bond and everybody loves a spy movie because there's no big concepts that people can't grapple.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You don't have to learn a lot in order to watch like a spy film, like a James Bond film. But when it comes to fantasy, you have to kind of already have a little bit of a grasp of fantasy. And not everybody likes fantasy, especially high fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, versus something that's more urban fantasy like Harry Potter that takes place in modern times in the real world. So the fact that Lord of the Rings got the budget that it got so that it could really succeed, because again, like I said, if this had a lower budget, they couldn't have done it, because they were spending their money on the right things, not just like big name actors, but they were spending it on miniatures, they were spending it on Weta Workshop, they were spending it on costumers and all of this stuff, and it paid off so well in Lord of the Rings, even compared to The Hobbit, which relied way more heavily on special effects versus practical effects. And it's part of what makes that movie, it's what makes the Lord of the Rings trilogy so timeless. Because it has this high fantasy setting, it's not our world, and you don't have people in modern clothes or even period clothes or anything like that. So it just has this sort of timeless quality to it. You could watch it at any point over between now and the next 50 years from now, and it would still carry the same weight. It wouldn't look dated. It wouldn't look old-fashioned. It's just gonna keep being great,
And a lot of that, we've talked a lot about the production, and we've talked a lot about the actors. We got to give a shout out to the screenplay writers, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. Like, here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize about the Lord of the Rings, especially if they've just seen the film. But the Lord of the Rings story is actually the epilogue of this like 10,000 year history. And a lot of that history is not stuff that you can just cut out and have the story make sense. Excuse me. So for Fran and Philippa and Peter to be able to take this story and work all that backstory in and have it work in a way that makes sense and flows. I mean, we're talking about decisions that Hollywood agents nowadays would laugh in your face at. Let's talk about just the opening of the Fellowship of the Ring, just that 10-minute backstory. You won't see that in any film nowadays. Nowadays, that would actually have to be expanded out to a film all of its own before anybody would even look at it, because they're like, okay, the audience is not going to follow this. They're not going to know what's going on, so we need to have this be expanded out. You can, or cut this bit altogether. Because Tolkien is not light reading by any stretch of the imagination. Lord of the Rings, saying Lord of the Rings is the lightest of his books is like saying that steel is lighter than titanium. I don't actually know if steel is lighter than titanium, so chemistry nerds, please don't at me. But like it's the Lord of the Rings is a very dense book, and Fran and Philip were able to condense it down and crystallize it into something that was easy to follow and made sense. And it's just I have to doff my hat to them. Like that, if you were to hand me the Lord of the Rings trilogy and say, I need you to make film scripts out of this, and you can't really leave out a whole lot of the detail, but you got to make it light and easy to follow and have it make sense, I'd be like, what drugs are you on, and where can I get some? Because there's no way that's working.
I think, and to their credit, in a very similar vein, that intro, that 10-minute, and it starts in black, which I know at the time was a big controversial thing, to just have somebody start narrating stuff while the screen is completely black. That's about the extent of heavy duty backstory that you get. And like you said, this is taking place at the end of a huge timeline. So you're kind of still plopped into the middle of a big scenario in a world that they don't do a whole lot to explain up front, and there's a lot of stuff that they just straight up don't explain. They make references to historical figures or whatever that they just don't explain, because it would be so unnatural to try and force in an explanation of some of this stuff. So they just trust the viewer to be smart enough to understand that they don't need to understand everything, if that makes sense. It makes the world feel more realistic if you're a little bit lost, if you don't understand every single thing, They don't need to sit there and tell you who Erendil was or something like that, They don't explain the gods. They don't explain the heavens. They don't do any of that. They just plop you in, give you a bit of an explanation. Sometimes they talk about how the countries feel about each other, and then let you have a war. And they don't sit there and have a whole origin story. And I feel like if they made this today, you're right. It would either be a whole film, or it would be like a 5-minute montage with everything slapped together in fucking fast forward. And they didn't do that. And it wasn't just that they were banking on the nerds knowing everything. It was that there's no way to condense down all of the history, and that history, it's not important for the sake of the film. So don't explain it, but still keep the series feeling authentic by leaving it in.
Yeah, and it was such a daunting task all around. And another aspect that you mentioned is like the production crew who had a workshop, and just like the amount of talent and effort that went into all of this stuff, hiring artists who had done Lord of the Rings artwork for years, getting legions of actual blacksmiths to come in and make these weapons. It's like if you go back and you watch the making of documentaries with the extended editions, it really does feel like watching an army prepare for war, because you have all these moving parts that are coming together to make this one whole. And you might look at and the thing is, like, when you're working on such a huge enterprise as this, it's very easy to feel like, okay, like, for example, they had these two guys who their whole job was just to make chainmail. That was literally their only job, was just hand make chainmail. And it is so easy to have a job like that and feel like, oh, I don't really matter. There, nothing I really do here really matters in the long run. None of this is nobody's gonna notice if I just take an off day. But like nobody on the production of this film had that attitude, and you see that by watching these making of docs, and it's amazing the amount of talent and dedication that went into these films. And again, it's one of the reasons why I think we will never see another film like this again in our lifetime.
Yeah. I think the most mind-blowing behind-the-scenes thing I heard from the behind-the-scenes documentaries on the Blu-ray discs was that every single actor in the entire trilogy, with the exception of one person, wore a wig. Which is an unbelievable amount of wigs to have to make. Like, even the little kids in Hobbiton had to wear wigs. Gosh almighty! The amount of effort that went into the wardrobes, and like you said, the blacksmithing, and just, like, they didn't cut corners with this one. They just didn't. And it's, like, yeah, we probably won't see another film that is so detail-oriented. And I think that's part of what, again, it looks so good and so timeless, because they weren't banking so heavily back then on the special effects, and they wanted everything to look authentic, and it did.
Yeah, so, I mean, just like, but like, again, and when this film came out, it was such a phenomenon. Like I said, I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it was a Star Wars for our generation. Although, like you said, Star Wars certainly had a much longer lasting impact. But like, after Lord of the Rings came out, suddenly, everyone was trying to do high fantasy movies. You had stuff like, Aragon, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. You had, I would kind of say How to Train Your Dragon kind of fits in there. You had all these people trying to make high fantasy books into films. And I think in another way, it kind of paved the way for the string of young adult fiction movies that we got in the in the 2010s that we discussed earlier. So, stuff like, the Hunger Games or the Maze Runner. I think a lot of that was the groundwork that was laid down by the Lord of the Rings, because it's the first time that we had a book series rendered to film. Well, maybe not the first time, because Harry Potter did precede it by a year or so, but it was one of the first times where we had a major book series rendered on film, done accurately, and have it be successful. I mean, like, there had been successful book movies before, like Jurassic Park, based on Michael Crichton's novel, but it wouldn't be correct to say that the film is book accurate, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that was cut out or changed or rearranged, but now here we have the Lord of the Rings, which is actually like 90% book accurate, and it managed to be a major seller. So now we have, like, okay, we can't just half-ass these book movies anymore. We've got to actually put some real effort into them.
I think one of the biggest impacts of the film and how it has affected cinema is the big fight scene, which obviously every Lord of the Rings film has a big fight scene. And so every movie after Lord of the Rings had to have a big... And then, of course, films before that had fight scenes. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's that two armies meeting each other, overhead shot of the two armies about to clash with each other on the battlefield fight scene. Every movie thereafter had to have this big, epic fight. And the first thing you see do it is Chronicles of Narnia, which came out very shortly after Lord of the Rings. And you have everybody gearing up for a big battle, which feels so incongruous with Chronicles of Narnia, regardless of book accuracy. Like,
we've gone to hanging out with beavers to big giant war scene.
Yeah, and sure, book accuracy, but still, like the we're all going to have a montage where we don armor and get out swords, and now the overhead shot of our two forces about to clash on the battlefield. Every freaking movie has that thereafter. It's sort of like the slow motion in the Matrix, and now every movie has to have super slow-mo to show something really cool happening, and how the Matrix affected cinema in that way. That's what the Lord of the Rings did with these big fights. Everything had to follow after that, and especially the fantasy series.
It brought back the epic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like, certainly the popularity of Lord of the Rings, did this help pave the way for the acceptance of, say, urban fantasies like Harry Potter? Who's to say? Who's to say? But certainly we see the effect of the cinematics of Lord of the Rings into other films.
Yeah, yeah, excuse me. I had a thought and I totally lost it.
It died of loneliness.
I died of hunger. I haven't eaten yet, so my brain's not working right. All right. So, of course, if we're going to gush about, our favorite movies, we have to do the stereotypical fanboy thing and gush about our favorite moments in the film. So, Kat, what are some of your absolute favorite moments in the Lord of the Rings trilogy?
Oof. Okay. This is not in any order, but like I said before, I love the reveal scene where the White Wizard is actually Gandalf and not Saruman. So Gandalf officially returns from the dead. I'm really actually quite obsessed with Gandalf, because he is a Maiar, and it's a bunch of stuff that they don't go into in the movies, or really even in the Lord of the Rings books. But his whole existence prior to living in Middle Earth is really, really fascinating to me. So that big reveal, the Council of Elrond is one of my favorite scenes. Goodness. I like Aragorn's big speech, the big men of the West speech. I like... hold on. I like... One of my very favorite moments in the whole trilogy is the scene where Theoden de-ages, because the special effects for that are some of the best effects I've ever seen in a film ever. And especially for that time, holy cow, it's so seamless.
Okay, well, since you mentioned Aragorn's Men of the West speech, I'm going to give a shout out to Theoden's speech at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields.
Yes.
The spears shall be shaken, shields shall be splintered, and it's just the way the music just like crescendos, like as the camera pulls back and you see the army of Rohan coming to aid Gondor. Oh my god, I still get tears in my eyes watching that scene.
Mm-hmm. There's something very magical about the horns, and it's meant to be magical in the books. In the books, sounds and music have their own kind of power, which makes a lot of sense if you read the Silmarillion and know that the entire universe was made through music. So the idea that when they show up and they blow the horns, and every time a horn blows, it's something so important. And that moment where Rohan shows up and you have the horns blowing and you're like, they're saved, and you know it, just from the horns blowing. It just has that effect.
And then another moment from the same film, and I think right around the same time, is when Pippin and Gandalf are at the near the top level of Minas Tirith, and Pippin is just like, scared and terrified, like, this is hopeless, why are we even continuing on, this is, and he's just scared out of his wits, and Gandalf just gives him this really comforting speech about, how death is not the end, and it's just another path that we all have to take, and he talks about, the undying lands and the wide shores under a swift sunrise, and just giving him this, this really comforting speech to a scared young, basically, kid. So, because a lot of people forget the hobbits are technically kids for their people for much of the story. They're just giving this comforting speech to a terrified young man in the middle of a dark situation, and I really love the way that scene is shot. I love the way that it's scored. I love Ian McKellen's delivery of the speech, and it's just one of those moments where just everything comes together for like just a perfect little moment. Another one being Sam's speech at the end of the Two Towers. It's like in the old stories, and it just, again, like, God, Philip and Fran can write a speech.
Yeah, like I'm getting choked up just thinking about those moments, because they are genuinely helpful things, especially in the last few years when times have been kind of rough And like they're actually very comforting, not just for the characters, but for us, the viewers. Like, I don't know how many times I've seen Sam's speech quoted like on Facebook going around when times are really hard.
And I think that really is the core of these films, is that, when so many films try to be epic, they just go for the spectacle. But, The Lord of the Rings also had heart. Like, there was real, genuine emotion and heart to this film. We get choked up about these moments and these characters because, we're actually given reason to care about them. And their reactions to these situations are genuine. And again, that comes down to both the script writing and the casting. Like, just, I can name maybe two other films with the level of heart that the Lord of the Rings managed to carry over an entire trilogy.
Another favorite moment is in Frodo versus Shelob, when Frodo's out and Sam steps in, and you had thought at this point that Sam was gone, and he picks up the Phial of Galadriel, and he's got the sword and he's got the phial and he's defending Frodo, and just the way that scene is framed, and just Sean Astin being Sean Astin, just, oh, what a great scene. And I love the whole fight with Shelob, because it is, in context of Lord of the Rings, not one of the big battles of the Pelennor Fields kind of, there's no mounted combatants and huge armies. It is a hobbit versus being hilariously outmatched versus a big giant spider. And Frodo loses that fight, and Sam has to come in, and they still don't actually kill Shelob. But the visuals of Sam with the sword and the phial, and basically the first moment where Sam becomes the hero is so stunning.
Yeah, there's just but I mean, we could go on and on about our favorite moments of this film. And it's just there's so much to this that had to go into this film to make it work, and it literally is just like a perfect storm. Because if any one of the elements that went into this film had gone off the rails, and if you watch the making of docs, you see it almost went off the rails several times.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Honest to God, I genuinely think that the reason why Lord of the Rings was on the whole better than The Hobbit was because both Fran and Philippa worked on Lord of the Rings, but they both didn't tag team on The Hobbit. And they, like, the combo of Fran and Philippa would sort of, like, when Peter Jackson had some idea that they didn't think would work, they quashed it. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And he would go, okay, yeah, you're right. And I feel like that's part of why The Hobbit didn't quite work out the same way, because it didn't have that dynamic duo of Fran and Philippa telling Peter Jackson no.
Well, the discussion of The Hobbit is a whole thing of its own, which we will say for another episode.
When the 20th anniversary of that trilogy rolls around.
Although I'm looking at Wikipedia and it's saying that Fran and Philippa did both work on The Hobbit, so I don't know. I'll have to go back and see what the proportional involvement was.
Yeah, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. Yeah.
But like it's so amazing to see how this film came together, and how, like I said, if any one of these elements wasn't there, the whole thing would have just fallen apart. It's like it really was a house of cards, and one that actually managed to stay standing. And like I said, we could go on and on gushing about this film and how much we love it, because it's so formative. I feel like it was something that was really formative to both of us in terms of our geek journeys. That it was like I've said many times already, it was Star Wars for our generation. So, but like I said, we could go on, and we are unfortunately running short on time. So, yeah, sound off in the comments. What do the Lord of the Rings films mean to you, and what are some of your favorite moments? What are some of your favorite aspects of the film? Is it the music? Is it the casting? Do you have a particularly favorite actor? Do you still have that Orlando Bloom poster that you had in high school hanging up on your wall? You know, sound off. Let us know what your thoughts on the Lord of the Rings films are. And you know, so now let's before we close out. Let's go back and revisit that question we were asking Ask Geek about the Amazon series. So, Kat, what are some things that you're excited and or worried about with the upcoming series?
Excited for whatever story it's going to be about. I know it's going to be in the age of whatever. I'm excited for whatever story it is that they spit out. Because everything that happened prior to Lord of the Rings was just as interesting historically as what happened in Lord of the Rings. All kinds of epic fights and heartfelt romances and stories and songs, and I'm so stoked for whatever the story ends up being. I am worried about casting. We have a rule about not getting too political on this show, but they have made there's been a bit of talk about the casting because literally every single person in the whole of Lord of the Rings was white, and they have talked about expanding out to non-white actors, and that is so amazing. I really hope that happens. I just hope that they do it right, that it all gets done well, and that people aren't awful about it, like fans aren't awful about it. So I'm just worried about how the casting is going to go, because Tolkien was not particularly sensitive about certain things, and we need a little more sensitivity than Tolkien had. I'm worried that the series will bank more on special effects than practical effects, because we know that, as we've discussed, the practical effects are part of what made Lord of the Rings look so good and look so timeless. And I don't want that kind of quality to be sacrificed for the expediency of getting a television series out on a deadline. And I am worried that they will do what every TV show does and try to shoehorn in a bunch of references. We don't need it. Just let us have something that's unique. We don't need you to mention the ring. We don't need you to mention the Dark Lord. Just make a show that has the show, whatever the show is supposed to be about, and don't try and sell us on the nostalgia. It's all I'm asking.
Okay. My big worry is one of tone. I'm worried that they're going to try and do Game of Thrones 2.0, which, you know, Game of Thrones had a very specific tone, and it worked for Game of Thrones, but I don't see that same tone working for Lord of the Rings. So, you know, but we shall see. You know, I don't even think we've had stills on this series, so it's still germinating. So we'll have more on that as it develops. But as far as this week goes, yeah, sound off in the comments. What do the Lord of the Rings films mean to you, and what are some of your favorite moments? Sound off in the comments. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. We will see you guys next time. As always, I'm Dr. Gonzo.
I'm the cat.
All right, we'll see you next time. Taka, play us out.